year after we formed our team, I kept getting, well, how are we gonna pick captains, coach? How are we gonna pick captains? I go, well, how do you normally do it? Well, normally it's the coach's son, and you don't have a son on the team, so who's going to be the captain? That was their answer. And I said, well, we have to have a conversation about this, because my experience, and I found this out quite a number of years ago, I've tried every possible way to pick captains. I've even had teams with no captains, because it makes life a little easier, I think. Because if you get the wrong ones, it can be very divisive, and it can create some issues in the locker room at every level that I've been in. When I coached at the high school level, it was a private school. We had kids from 4 or 5 different communities, so they had their own tribe in the locker room. They wanted to sit next to each other. The kids from Maple Grove wanted to sit together. The Wayzata kids wanted to sit together. Whatever. And so I came up with a plan to have not only captains, but a leadership group. So we would solicit opinions from the players and who they respected. We would select a couple of captains, maybe a couple of assistant captains, depending what the team looked like and the ages and what the team was like. And then I would say to them, who else should we bring into this group? Because I use a book called the Team Captain's Leadership Development Manual by a guy named Jansen. And it's a book about this thick. It's actually kind of a workbook. It's really terrific. It's easy read. And it talks about leadership, basically, how to be a good leader and what your roles are. If you're a captain or a leader in your team, what's your relationship with the other players? What's your relationship with the coaches? And what's your relationship to the other captains or assistants? And it's really terrific. I've used it with the high school girls last year here, and the U15 girls before that too. They really, because most, so you pick a captain, and then what do you say? Well, what's the captain going to do? So if you put somebody in a leadership position, you ought to give them some guidance in terms of what's your role. So I had a kid one year. He was a captain, and he came into my locker room in like December, and he was a kid from a community called Minnetonka. And he said, I can't be captain anymore. I said, well, why? Well, those kids from Maple Grove, they don't do anything I tell them to do. I said, well, why do you think you should be telling them to do anything? I mean, what kinds of things are you telling them? And we talked about it. He says, no, I said, Hadley, you're a leader by example, not by, I'm the coach. I'll tell people what to do. Your job is to kind of keep peace in the locker room and identify when kids are if they're struggling a little bit. You're a senior, maybe put your arm around, a 10th grader and help them understand how we do things here on our team. That's the kind of leadership that you should be doing. Now, I hadn't done the formal leadership training at that point, and that's when I decided I needed to do it. So even today with my Bantam team, the process got too many parents involved. So the leadership group is now 13 kids. But I told them that if you're in this thing, we're going to have 5 meetings. You've got to do the homework. You got to read the book. And so then I had to split it into 2 groups and cut the sessions down. I mean, these are 13 and 14-year-old boys, and one is a girl. And so almost the whole, well, not the whole, we have 19 kids in the team, so we didn't quite get everybody into it. But the others didn't want to be in it, which is fine. We have 2 captains, we have 2 assistant captains, and then we have all these other kids. And we read 2 chapters, and then they read them, and they write in their answers to the questions. It's sort of like, do they understand what the topic was about for the chapter? I also give them an assignment. I want them to go, and I think the book says, go interview a leader that you respect in your life. And that was a little hard for them. I said, well, how about your father or your mother? If they have, whichever one has a day job, they're probably in a leadership role of some sort. So get their take on what leadership means to them. But you can be a leader in your projects you do at school. You can be a leader at church, in your church groups. But you can be a leader by choice. And you don't have to defer to other people if you don't want to. And so the conversations are actually quite good. And to me, they read the book, and then I just have them tell me what they learned from the reading, and that helps me develop a better relationship with the players too, and also a better relationship with each other. So I don't think I'll ever go back to having a small group. I'm going to keep having it as a fairly large group of people, of kids that want to be involved in it. And so, as we have probably all experienced in our playing careers, we've played on teams that had great leadership, and we've played on teams that kind of neutral. If it's the best player on the team, they're not necessarily the best leader. They're not necessarily, will they be the best coach, a la Wayne Gretzky. Where the game comes easy to somebody, it's hard for them to empathize with other players where the game doesn't come quite so easy. And so, but I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but this is the way I'm doing it now. And I think I've always said during the years, I wish I could give this to more kids. Well, now I am. And so I've evolved how I'm going. I think is it important? I don't know. It's one of those things that if 10 kids are involved, a couple of them will really grab a hold of it, just like anything else we do, right? But I've been through leadership training in my career, the financial industry. Companies are desperate for leaders. They're desperate for leaders. Good leaders, effective leaders that inspire people and motivate them and get them going in all in the same direction. And in the business world today, they are desperate not only for leaders, but for female leaders. I don't want to speak for the female part of our population, but they don't tend to be leader. It doesn't seem to be very natural for a lot of the female players I have worked with to want to be in that kind of a role. There's a lot of reasons for it, but and some of them are good reasons, but some of them are, they're more. I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. That's for people smarter than me. I know what the answers are, but I don't. It's not necessary to go there with this. So, but I think.
Hal, can I interrupt you for a minute? I've got a thought.
Yeah.
The leadership book. If you could share with us in some way, send me an email, the name of the author and the actual accurate title.
Yep.
I just wanted to share with you, Alan Andrews, who's older than any of us. He is still coaching a novice team, but 5 years ago, he had them read a leadership book. And
Yep.
they have to write a summary of each chapter. He sent me
Yep.
summaries of that chapter. And he's teaching them to become entrepreneurs, independent for their decision making and doing service. So I just wanted to let you know that was going on. And then when you made the comment on females not wanting to be leaders, I wonder, Sammy, I don't know if we're going to open a can of worms here or not, but I always felt uh, females are built for leadership because they listen. And guys who lead tend to talk too much. So, Sammy, I wonder if you have any comments or anything you want to ask or add from your perspective on the role of leadership and sure, bring up the roadblocks or the pitfalls of what females are facing.
Well, I certainly don't want to usurp too much of Hal's conversation because I'm really enjoying it. A couple things that surprised me so far is well, thank you first off for getting coaches to wear helmets. I think that's huge. I wore a helmet long before it was ever cool. And now it's just part of the game, which is great. And then the other thing was how much money that coach certification makes organizations. I never really thought about that, but that is a money-making endeavor. So two things. In terms of women in leadership roles, I think, I think both you guys are right. And I think that goes for men too. Some are wired that way and some aren't, but it is as equally prevalent in men and women, I think, as anybody else. I think what happens to people in maybe underserved populations, whether it is gender, whether it is sexuality, whether it is race, is often those people that are the minorities have never been placed in those roles. The expectations have been lower. All these things that I'm sure that Hal knows, that there's a lot of reasons, and it isn't necessarily because women, are not wired that way or not great at it, because there's lots of women that are, so great at it. And but it is, it's difficult in a sport like hockey to emerge into a leadership role. When you do, what I'm finding different now is that a lot of girls grew up playing girls hockey at a time when it was acceptable and there was no, there wasn't the stereotypes that perhaps existed prior. So those girls are emerging into situations with great coaches, with great leadership role models, and are emerging as leaders and, are doing an incredible job. The ones that made it through, I refer back to Thomas Pacina's conversation about women in the Czech Republic. The ones that made it through in maybe a male-dominated sport, it either made you just accept that you had to say nothing along the way in order to fit in, or it was the opposite, and you were, the verbose, talkative, extrovert out there. So I think we will see those roles change. I'm sure Hal has seen that change. I don't think that what Hal said was meant in any sort of discriminatory way, so don't worry. I know what you mean, and I know that we as coaches have that responsibility to ensure that all kids have that opportunity, because Wally's right that there's the listening skills that are so key, and the quieter ones sometimes can be a really great leader. They don't have to be the rah type situation. I'd be really curious to read the book. I was curious if it's Peter Jansen, who's the sports psychologist who wrote the book, or a different Jansen.
No, it's a different guy. I'll look it up here while we're chatting. But those are great comments, Sammy. And I had a Bantam team, the last Minnesota Bantam team that went to a Tier 1 national championships. And I think I've mentioned before, but Blake Wheeler, who's captain of the Winnipeg Jets, was on that team. There were two other kids that have been playing in Europe ever since. And they were all my captains. and we went to a ropes and ladders outdoor team building event, and I just watched all day, and there was a facilitator that ran it, and he said, what'd you learn by watching? I said, I got the wrong captains, because none of those 3 kids were good captains. They were selfish. It was everything's about them. And the best leader on the team was not a captain. We had one. Fortunately, we had one. And, he was kind of a third line defenseman. But everybody loved him and they listened to him, and he was motivational, and he helped solve problems in the locker room, because we had a few. When you have that, we not only had those kids that were great hockey players, we had 2 players on the team that ended up playing many years in the National Football League. And so that was a pretty talented group of kids.
Yeah, what I find difficult on my team with the Toronto Six is every single one of my players was an assistant or a captain on their college team, NCAA Division I. So I think also too, it's warranted to be said that every person plays a different role on a different team. Just because you're a leader on one team doesn't necessarily engender you to be the leader on the next team too, right? It's different circumstance, different people, different coaching staff, different way of communication. And some coaches are going to be able to communicate really well with that player, others are not. So yeah, I don't want to take up too much of Hal's time, and I know Tim has a question, so.
Before Tim, I'll make one other comment. I tell our players that everybody can be a leader in some way, shape, or form. And everybody has a role on the team. Whatever, if you aren't a goal scorer, and most kids aren't, you have to find a way to lead in other categories. Maybe you can be the number 1 in blocking shots. Maybe you can be the best at something else, and you can then encourage a couple of your teammates to follow your lead. And that's sort of that internal leadership rather than at the higher level. So it's just a work in progress for sure. Yeah. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks.
Yeah, just to put maybe a slightly different spin on the leaders, women and leadership. So I work for a rather large corporation here in the States, and just before our call started this morning, I got an email where the company has formed a new business segment, and they announced 13 leaders in that new business segment. 8 of those 13 are women. So I just think it's in the world today, and in industry and business, without women, there's a huge vacuum in leadership. So any girl that can be placed in a leadership position on a sports team, I mean, I'd say put that on your resume, after college, when you're it's just huge. Companies are looking for people that can work with people and lead them and set examples. So again, not hockey related maybe, but on the other hand, very much hockey related, right?
Well, I mean, we're trying to teach life lessons. I had a really great assistant coach last year coaching the JV girls team, and she had been a captain of the high school team, and she had played. I don't think she played in college, but she played some sort of a junior thing. And I would come up with an idea, and I'd talk to her about it. She'd go, no, I don't think so. But she'd say, let's do it this way. And I go, okay, that's cool. So she was much more in tune with how the kids on the team would react to something that I might want to do. And she said, that's a good idea, but let's do it like this, because I think it'll be better. It'll come better. It'll come off better, and we'll get better results. So I think that's amazing. I really have come to the conclusion, though, that for the most part, that we're not too far away from female teams being coached by females. And that's because the female game has grown so much that they're coming out of college and they're coming, we got the pros, and we got great role models for the kids. And I told Sammy I'm bringing my female goaltender to meet her February 28th when you're in town. So she's really excited. She was amazed. She's read about half the book, but she's just amazed at what you've accomplished. She's so excited. So she's a wonderful young lady. So leadership. So I just think the world is waiting for all these female leaders to come out of whatever sports environment or whatever other environment they can, because companies want them, they need them on the board of directors, and they provide valuable insights. Tom raised his hand twice.
Well, I guess talking about female leadership, Wally says Cassie Campbell's the best leader he's seen, and she's coaching with me right now, and she's been great. I just want to comment that in '72 I was in Sioux City when you were talking about being in Denver, and I think Rich Preston was on that Denver team. I play hockey with him still.
Wow, cool.